Number 13. The Outdoorsman. In 1986, 19-year-old Christopher Knight amended civilization in favor of living deep in the woods of Maine. On that day, he passed by a random hiker, and the two politely exchanged hellos. It would be the last conversation he had with another human being until he was caught by police and 13. By then, he was 46 and had made quite an impression on the local townsfolk of North Point. For years he had been regularly breaking into homes and stealing whatever he could. Clothing, food, batteries, alcohol, camping gear, and propane tanks were the items he stole. The most non-profit campsites and seasonal homes were his two favorite targets, but he would not hesitate to break into homes while people were away at work. His legend only grew. His decades were on the North Point Hermit, as he soon became known as committed over 1,000 burglaries and became an almost mythological presence. His fruitful grip on the community became so bad that they would leave food out for him in the colder months. If you didn't leave food out for him, then he would have come into your home for as many home robberies as he's committed. The North Point Hermit was always careful to never leave a trail back to his lair. Likewise, he never burned the fire because he didn't want anybody to see the smoke, instead choosing to bury himself under piles of sleeping bags, lying emotionless in the frigid 10-degree winter weather. As hard as he tried, however, he would eventually get caught. A non-profit organization called the Pine Tree Camp had grown tired of constant death. So they installed cameras with motion detectors on their property. Police caught Christopher walking out of a cabin with a backpack full of food. He was arrested and sentenced to 7 months in jail with 3 years probation. When he showed the police where he lived, they were stunned at the amount of items that he had managed to collect over the years. In total, they removed enough stolen belongings to fill it to full-size storage units. While these were mostly ordinary household items, they nevertheless represented the collective terror of an entire town. For 28 years, residents had felt constantly watched and otherwise stalked in their very own homes by an unknown intruder. The police themselves were thoroughly unnerved as they sifted through an assortment of old labels from a dark period of local history. Number 12. The Hooker's Headstone. In 2005, a homeless man who goes by the name River Wolf is wandering around deep in the woods of Santa Cruz, California, when he steps over a patch of land that feels different from the rest of the world. He kneels down and brushes some thickets aside to reveal an old tombstone with a woman's name on it. She had died in 1898 at the age of 21. Her name was Mary Holmes. The tombstone contains no other information. Besides these 3 basic facts, it did not say that she would be missed, or that she was loved, or even when he or she had been born. From the looks of things, someone must have stolen it and thrown it on the ground 2 years ago. It was a creepy discovery for sure. But since River Wolf had seen a lot of strange things out in the woods, he didn't think much more of it until 7 years later, in 2012. That's when he reads an article online about Mary Holmes, and the name clicks with this creepy for us to find. He discovers that she was a prostitute outcast who caught tuberculosis and had to leave her young daughter behind. The grief was simply too much. The depressed madam downed a bottle of carbolic and fell to the floor as the highly lethal chemical, which was used during this time period to sterilize surgical instruments, burns her insides. Within 15 minutes, she was dead. River Wolf feels compelled to contact a museum of art and history, so that he can show them where the tombstone was. Her tombstone was quite hidden, and the workers were amazed. He was able to stumble upon it all. Some say that River Wolf could have only come across the tombstone of Mary Holmes, with the help of her actual ghost, who only wanted her marker to be shown the proper respect. It is now on display at the museum. Number 11. The Black Guy That Goes Child. 7-year-old Christine and Darby was playing outside of her home in Walsall, England, when she was abducted by a dangerous man named Rahman Leslie Morris. The notorious paedophile murderer strangled her with his bare hands and let her in the field. Her brutal death occurred in August of 1967. But she would surface again many years later in 2015. This time as a black-eyed ghost child. A paranormal investigator named Tom Buckmaster and his ghost hunting team set up special cameras to record the area where Christine's frail body had been recovered. According to Tom's team, this paranormal footage clearly captures a distant child who has dressed in all white. As she moves across the forest floor, the ghostly figure appears to cast its own source of light. And if you look closely enough, you can vaguely make out her legs. Based on this evidence, Tom feels confident that Christine's tortured spirit is now a black-eyed ghost child. Black-eyed ghost children are menacing figures that are largely thought to be the stuff of urban legend. Sightings of them begin in the 90s and persist to this very day, as Tom will certainly tell you. Number 10. The Open Pet Cemetery. A woman is taking a stroll through her private woods in the Hampshire County, West Virginia. When a pungent stench stops her dead in her tracks, the horrible rotting smell hanging stick in the air, and it isn't long before she reaches the source. What she stumbles upon is a traumatic sight for animal lovers everywhere. Hundreds upon hundreds of dead animals are strewn about the forest floor, all in various states of decay. Dead dogs, cats, bunnies, raccoons, deer, and foxes stare back at her, many with their heads cut off and medical tubes sticking out of the bloated carcasses. A large portion have tags on their colors with common pet names. Investigators are able to use this information to trace the corpses back to a company called Family Pet Cremations. This company has a state contract to dispose all of West Virginia's dead animals, but instead of incinerating them, like they were supposed to, they apparently chose to cut costs by leaving them to rot in the wild instead. As for why many of the animals had their heads cut off, they had been tested for rabies. When it was all said and done, more than 250 corpses were recovered from the gruesome discovery. Over 4,000 pounds of rotten animal flesh had to be removed. But that's not all. Two other similar dump sites were scattered throughout the site, and perhaps even more have yet to be discovered. Number 9. The Phantom Suspect. One summer night in Rainham, Massachusetts. A driver sees a car on the side of the road and pulls over to help the vehicles empty. But 15 feet away is a woman's body in the forest. She has covered in blood and appears to have been murdered. The driver panics and rushes to a stranger's house to call 911. When the police arrive with a medical team, they have to use industrial cutters to clear the forest overgrowth and get to the woman's body, something that scared her so badly that she had ran into a patch of thorny vines and became stuck. Amazingly, they find a pose and the unnamed victim is rushed to the hospital in critical condition. One of the neighbors tells police that she had seen another woman in the area a few hours before who was acting suspiciously. They set up a perimeter and combed the forest with canine units, but ultimately finding nothing. The person responsible for this remains at large to this day. Unless, of course, the woman is completely insane and did this to herself, which police contend is also a possibility. Number 8. Disturbing her remains. In March of 2015, 3 brothers were hiking in the woods of Westchester, Pennsylvania, at around 3 in the afternoon, when one of them tripped over a rock. When he looked down, he found it to not be a rock, but an old school. It didn't look like they belonged to any animal that they had ever seen before. So they curiously picked it up and went back home to show their mother, Lisa Willem, who was a trained nurse. She took one look at it and her husband immediately called the police. The boys took investigators to where they found the school and a full skeleton was soon uncovered. A DNA test revealed the remains belonged to a woman anywhere from 35 to 60 years of age. There was not a scrap of tissue left on her. She had been dead for at least 6 months. Police wouldn't say if the school had any structural damage, but Eliza said that she couldn't see any trauma when she first saw it. Either way, the dental records and other evidence did not match anyone reported missing in their entire state. Police suspect that the body could have been dumped from somewhere out of state. Number 7. What's yours is mine. Maribel and his co-worker Alex are 2 construction workers digging up a plot of land in the woods of Danville, Arkansas. They come across the foreign object that is round, brown, and ancient. Alex guesses that it's a cannonball from the Civil War and it gives it a hand throw. Though they did not know it at the time. Alex had just almost killed them both. Matt thinks that the cannonball looks extremely interesting. So he puts it in his car and was home in Hot Springs to show the rest of his family. They all agree that it would make for a nice conversation piece, but it's quite dirty. So he and his son Justice spend an afternoon power washing it in the driveway. They take it inside when they are finished, and leave it on the kitchen counter to dry. The next day, Matt contacts at local Civil War museum and tells them about his rare discovery. They want to verify the artifact for themselves. So he tries over what they can involve bouncing around in his back seat. Imagine his surprise when museum officials told him that this is no cannonball, but rather a Confederate Atlanta mine with a pressure-sensitive fuse. One false move, and it's kaboom. With this newfound knowledge, Matt drives home at 5 miles per hour. While gripping the steering wheel hard enough to turn his knuckles white, the mind is carefully wrapped in a sleeping bag in the backseat. Every mile feels like a full day. He makes it home alive and calls the police. They deploy a fully armored bomb squad to his home to dispose of it. But not without evacuating the entire neighborhood first. The squad takes the device to a nearby landfill and designated with C for explosives. They aren't sure if there are any more mines out there waiting to be found. But I personally haven't heard of a minefield with just one mine. Have you? It's a proven fact that generosity makes you a happier person. So if you're generous enough to like this video, then thank you because it really helps us out. Number 6. That think it's 11:30 at night, when Gianna Proponents hears a tiny scream coming from outside her California home. It sounds completely inhumane, like nothing she has ever heard before. The brave woman cautiously walks outside to investigate her wooded backyard, trying to make as little noise as possible. She sees something lying in the grass that even a photograph cannot properly explain. The slimy pink creature has 2 limbs and a gelatinous blob for a body. A well-formed neck takes up half of its body, a topple which sits a small overhead with elven ears and grey eyes. Its human-like face appears to have a nose and lips, and its mouth is stuck in a frozen scream. The grass around his strange corpse is matted down with a thick mystery ooze that Gianna does not touch. She stays outside long enough to take 7 quick pictures and then rushes back into her home. She still has no clue what it is. Do you? Number 5. Nazi aliens. 2 years ago, a team of Russian exploiters were hiking the heavily wooded area of Mountain Bolshoi to Jack when they chanced upon a strange and evil-looking cave. Inside, they were shocked to find the remains of a possible alien race, who apparently had connections with the evil regime. The team finds two strange humanoid skulls. Each of them lacks a jawbone and has gigantic eye sockets that appear to be 3 times larger than a human's. Their wide and nasal passages indicate that there were once carbon-based life forms. But beyond that, it's hard to tell. According to the team's leader, Vladimir Malakhov, DNA tests have proved inconclusive. Therefore, everything from demons to aliens have been proposed. Next, they find an old briefcase nearby with a strange message on the side in cryptic runes based on the area's history. They suspect these woods have been a Nazi meeting ground for alien contact, or perhaps the summoned demons for Hitler's various occult programs. Number 4, the Stalker Shrine. James Rankins is walking through the woods of Syracuse, New York in search of some local punks who are making fire pits on private property. He follows a series of hard-to-reach trails, and walks through a hole in the fence, expecting to come across a group of them at any minute. Instead, he finds an empty campsite that fills him with dread. It appears that whoever owns this site has been up to no good for quite some time. For whatever reason, they have been collecting posters of missing people and putting them on trees. They even had gone to the trouble of having the posters laminated. James didn't want to believe it. But it was as if somebody had created this area as a quiet place to reflect on the previous kills. The young command finds plenty of supporting evidence. Besides the missing posters, a shoddy blanket. What they open the can of food suggests is that someone is squatting here. There are also 6 tied together in such a way that they could have formed a cage or a trap. He also sees a shovel and what appears to be a recently filled-in hole. At that moment, he realizes that there very well could be a corpse underneath those leaves. Suddenly, he hears voices in the distance and sees a dog. James doesn't stick around to find out who the campsite belongs to. He beats a hasty retreat and notifies police when police detectives begin to question neighbors. One says they created the campsite for a Halloween party. This story seems to be enough to satisfy police but not the internet. According to James, the supposed Halloween decorations have been up since August. And they continue to remain there while the past Halloween. Could his neighbor still be using them as a shrine for murder worship? Number 3, tomb of the mutilated firefighters rushed to put out a forest fire in Grapevine, Texas before it can be spread. Thankfully, somebody had seen the smoke and reported it quickly enough for them to react as they searched the smoldering scene for evidence of what started the blaze. They come across a gruesome source, a dismembered body. Investigators are able to identify the charred remains as 24-year-old Jacqueline Vandergriff. She was a student at the nearby Texas Women's University. They begin to piece together her last known whereabouts and learned that a night before the fire she had met a 30-year-old exercise coach named Dean Bryant at a local bar. Surveillance footage shows the two leaving together with a third friend. Her cell phone GPS coordinates puts her in Dean's house on that same night. When they search Dean's house, they find it Jacqueline's purse and the garbage. He is now being held on $1 million bond on a capital murder charges. Interestingly enough, he had been arrested for trespassing and stalking a different woman 1 week before the murder. Number 2, for us, based on the border of India and Bangladesh lies a dense mangrove forest that is home to all sorts of fierce wildlife, namely 500 hungry tigers. This large tiger population is responsible for attacking at least 60 people every year. They even sneak into villages from time to time. In fact, a tiger once burst through the walls of a bamboo hut and snatched the 83-year-old woman. In 1997, Jamal Muhammad entered the forest in search of wild game to feed his family. Unfortunately for him, a wild tiger was doing the same. The ferocious beast pounced on him and clawed at his legs so that he couldn't run away. Then it dragged him 10 feet underwater, which is a common strategy tigers use to kill prey. Jamal foxed back and somehow managed to kick himself free. He desperately swam as far down into the water as he could and then surfaced. The tiger was nowhere to be found. A passing boat picked him up. His tiger troubles, however, were far from over. 10 years later, he went into the forest again, this time looking for firewood to keep his family warm. A nearby tiger was laying in the tall grass at the edge of the forest getting some sun. It noticed Jamal and went into an aggressive posture, ready to pounce. The two roared at each other for at least half an hour in a test of wills. Jamal was obviously much weaker than the tiger. But his brave stance made the wild beast reluctant to attack. When Jamal's wife came back with an angry mob, the tiger made a quick retreat, and Jamal narrowly escaped. Number 1, Demolition Man. And man was walking along a private forest trail in Harlan County in Kentucky when he came across a camera lying in the middle of the ground. Motion-sensitive trail cameras such as this one are often used to capture images of wildlife. They can be quite expensive. So this is a rare find. This particular camera has no batteries and no memory card, so he hangs onto it for a bit and later gives it to a friend. When his friend inserts batteries, a huge explosion rocks him in the chest and 2 blows off his fingers. Somebody had booby-trapped it with explosives. Police investigate the trail and find another camera rig to explode. Somebody had to use an empty showcasing hot glue coins, copper wire and gunpowder to modify the camera so that it would detonate as soon as a battery was installed. They were able to trace the cameras back to one man, Mark Saul Wave. Mark Saul Wave is a loner in his late 30s who the local townspeople consider a dangerous genius. When they search his house, they find a copper wiring in the trash, shotgun shells that had been cut down black powder, and they note that reads "Broken camera for our broken soul." Apparently, Mark had grown tired of having his cameras stolen. So he had rigged them with explosive devices to punish the would-be thief. He either hadn't considered an innocent person coming across the camera, or he just didn't care. He was a urologist with access to painkillers and a history of selling them. So perhaps pills were clouding his judgment at the time. Despite the circumstantial evidence, Mark does not admit to anything. Police don't have enough evidence to charge him with any crimes, but they suspect he knows more. They can do little more than give him a trial date, and a preliminary hearing to learn more. Within that time, however, Mark would strike again. Police soon learned that Mark was up to his old tricks again, setting explosives in the woods. They set up a perimeter and sent in a search team to find him. When they finally come across Mark later that evening, he is far from cooperative. After a brief standoff, he lunges for an officer's gun and a last-ditch effort to get away. He is riddled with bullets and slowly dies in the leaves. Although the immediate threat may be over, Mark's handiwork still lives on. Police now find themselves left with the daunting task of checking every troll camera in the woods for explosives. It's almost impossible to find them all. And on top of that, who knows what other traps the madman could have left out there. Perhaps years later, Mark will have his revenge. Hey guys, thanks for watching this video. If you have any ideas for a top 13 list, submitted them to us at lifeconcierge@gmail.com. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe and hit the notification bell to receive future fun, informative and entertaining videos. Thanks for watching.